And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is part one of our top 10 guests of 2019. This is an amazing episode. We have Marshall Goldsmith, we have Ken Blanchard, we have Stephen M.R. Covey, we have Brian Solis, and we have Jeff Hazlett. I want to thank all of them for having given of their time and their wisdom to us this year, and I hope you all enjoy this episode. Thank you. I'm delighted today to have one of my favorites, actually, in terms of the content space, Dr. Marshall Goldsmith. He's the only two-time winner of the Thinkers 50 Award for the number one leadership thinker in the world. He's been ranked as the number one executive coach in the world and a top 10 business thinker for the past 8 years. He's the author of or editor of 36 books, including 3 New York Times bestsellers that have sold over 2.5 million copies. I can go on and on and on about all his attributes, but I'd rather get in and just dive into the conversation. So thank you so much for joining us today, Marshall.
So happy to talk with you.
Great. So let's just dive in here. You are someone that lots of people obviously admire and look up to, and we want to talk about sort of the journey that you've taken on the business side here, right? So, to sort of paraphrase your book. So, how did you get here?
Well, I'm very, very fortunate. Paul Hersey, one of my old mentors, had a great quote. He said, "Easy to look tall, you stand on the shoulders of giants." So I feel I have been very, very blessed. I'll give you my story about this from more, as you requested, more of the business side. To start with, what I did is I met Paul Hersey many years ago. Paul got double booked, and he said, "Can you do what I do?" And I said, "I don't know." He said, "Look, I need this help. Can you do what I do?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "Look, I'm desperate." I said, "Well, I don't know." He said, "I'll pay you $1,000 for a day." I was making $15,000 for a year. That was 42 years ago. I was 28 years old. $1,000 for a day back then was a lot of money.
Yeah.
So I said, "Paul, I'll give it a shot." I did a program for the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. They were incredibly upset when I showed up, but I got ranked first place of all the speakers. And they called Paul up and said, "Do you want to send Marshall back again? We like him." Paul said, "Sounds good." He called me up and said, "You want to do this again?" That's how I got into business. Very, very fortunate. I got into coaching also by accident. A big company said to me, "I got this kid working for me, young, smart, dedicated, hardworking jerk." He said, "It'd be worth a fortune to me if I could turn the kid around." I said, "I like fortunes. Maybe I could help him." He said, "I doubt it." I said, "Well, maybe I could help him." He said, I don't think so." And then I came up with an idea. I said, "I'll work with him for a year. If he gets better, pay me. If he doesn't get better, it's all free." That was the beginning of executive coaching.
I love it. So one of the things I observed in the way you've operated your business over the years is you've been really clear about what you love to do in terms of the speaking and the coaching and the writing, less of the coaching as of late, and really clear about what you don't want to be doing. And you've designed sort of the life and the business to support that, where you've got a variety of partnership deals, et cetera. So talk about sort of coming to the decision of, hey, I'm really good at this, and therefore this is the way I should structure it. And I need others to help me, and how do I vet them and all that sort of fun stuff.
Well, it's interesting because I'm really, if you had to look at my career, a lot of this is based on wonderful relationships. And one thing I'd recommend to all your listeners is be open-minded about doing volunteer work. Let me talk about that. I did a program for the Red Cross, and I did free training for all their leaders and stuff, which was a huge project. And then through that, I got to meet Francis Hesselbein, who was the CEO of the. Well, then Francis introduced me to Peter Drucker. And the first book I ever did was called The Leader of the Future. And the people on the cover's name were Francis Hesselbein, Richard Beckard, Peter Drucker, and me. Now, I was nobody compared to these people.
Yep.
But after I did 6 books with them, guess what? I'm one of them.
Yeah, they're pretty good.
Yeah, I'm one of them. And that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't done volunteer work. So I think it's really good when you get started just to meet great people, do volunteer work, and also pay your dues. I mean, nobody starts at the top. I mean, when I was working with Paul Hersey, I was carrying the bags.
Yep.
You got to know my place here. And I was not him or Peter Drucker or Francis Hesselbein or any of those people. So, I think if you pay your dues, it really, really helps a lot. So And then back to what your question is about focus. I think it's great to be an expert at something, but not everything. And you really need to be sensitive about saying, I'm the world's expert at X, but I don't do Y and Z.
Now, but early on, a lot of folks say, but I could do Y and Z, and maybe I'll do F and G and whatever as well. And I think it's that discipline and that structure saying, no, I am the X person, and I'm going to be better at anybody than X, and that's my craft, and that's what I'm going to hone in on, and everything else is sort of a distraction. And I think it's a tough discipline to maintain.
I completely agree with you because, what happens is number one, you can't be the world's expert at everything. You can be a dilettante at everything, but you can't be the
Yep.
world's expert at everything. And when you focus, people have a lot more respect for you because you're
Yep.
not trying to be the expert on everything. Look, my area of expertise is helping successful leaders achieve positive, lasting change in behavior for themselves or people in their teams. I'm the world's expert on that. Do a Google search for helping successful leaders. The first 500 hits you get in the world, 450 are me, and the entire rest of the world is 50. I won.
Yep.
And by the way, I've got a question. Who's the most famous executive coach? Me.
You?
I got a question. Who's second?
No idea.
See, that's really focus.
Yep.
That's focus and build a brand. And I would highly recommend to your listeners to, build a brand. But your brand, if your brand is I'm good at everything, you have no brand.
Yeah, 100%. Because, everybody's a commodity or could easily be commoditized. And it's that investment in the brand and the consistency. If there's someone out there listening that's, let's say, equal to Marshall 20 years ago, 25 years ago, right? Successful, starting out on their journey, but not where they want to be just yet. What words of advice might you give them in terms of do this and maybe don't do that in order to be more successful and have more impact, which is probably more important as a thought leader?
I would reach out to very successful people. I think you're going to find many of them to be kind and generous. Anybody that reaches out to me, I try to talk to them and help them as best I can. And the only price I have is they have to be willing to do the same thing. Let's say they're successful. They have to do the same thing for other people when they get old.
That's wonderful advice. I am truly in awe of our guest today and honored that he has decided to join us today. So he doesn't need an introduction, but I will do so anyway. So I have Ken Blanchard on with us today. Ken is one of the most influential leadership experts in the world. He's the co-author of the iconic bestseller, The 1 Minute Manager, and more than 65 other books whose total sales have exceeded 22 million copies. In 2005, he was inducted to Amazon's Hall of Fame as one of the 25 best-selling authors of all time. He's the Ken Blanchard Company has been around for a long, long time and has been in the business of deploying leadership development to people in the workplace for many, many years. But Ken, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, Peter, it's a joy. This is our 40th year in business. Can you imagine?
I think it's going to work out okay for you.
Yes.
I have the feeling. I think there'll be 40 more and then some. So I don't even know where to start. Maybe why don't we start backwards and say, sort of, tell us about some of the changes, some of the many changes that you've seen in the marketplace over the years and how you've adjusted to take advantage of them, be that on the publishing side or the leadership development side. What's different today?
Well, it's interesting. When Spencer Johnson and I got together, he was a children's book writer, wrote the whole series called Value Tales, The Value of Honesty, the story of Abe Lincoln, The Value of Courage, the story of Helen Keller. And my wife met him at this cocktail party we were at, and she hand carried him over and said, "You guys ought to write a children's book for managers. They won't read anything else." And and so that's how we got started. He was working on a 1 minute scolding with a psychiatrist, and I invited him to a seminar, and he came up running at the end and said, "Forget parenting, let's do the 1 minute manager." And since he was a children's book writer and I'm a storyteller, we decided to write a parable because our favorite books were the Jonathan Livingston Seagull and the Littlest Prince and Augmentinos.
Right.
And so we started writing short parables. And I think that was really new in the market in 1982. I don't think there had been any business books that were parable type books. And now you'll see a lot of them. Patrick Lencioni has done a great job with parables, with the addition of at the end, in the appendix he goes into more depth in the concepts. But That was a new thing in the market. I think that people are still looking for uh, easy to read, simple stuff that they can use, and I think sometimes people just write too much. I always say to people, you might have 3 or 4 books in there. I did write a big book recently called Servant Leadership in Action. I got 44 contributors, but most readings books, the articles are too long, and this is all the articles are about 6 or 7 pages. So I tell people it's a great bathroom book. You can
Yeah,
read
exactly.
one while you're sitting there. Uh, but
Exactly. But let me ask you then. So in 1982, when you put the book in parable form, if we think about some of the parallels there, that was a fairly radical or unconventional modality to put a business book in, right? And if we, fast forward almost 40 years from that, there's lots of other ways and modalities that business content gets deployed that people wouldn't have taken seriously, 5 years ago, 15 years ago, 25 years ago, whether that's short form video, whether that's pull down library. So talk a little bit about that, because I think one of the breakthroughs in the 1 Minute Manager, besides the content was really good, you didn't take the format so seriously and were willing to experiment with a modality.
yes, and I think today technology has done tremendous to publishing. Because hardcover books that people can have in their hands, they still sell, but most people sell more books online
Sure.
or do video kinds of things. I think you need to really be open to it. And I see, Peter, a lot of people going to self-publishing today
Yes.
because with all the different ways to publicize your stuff, one of the things that I think the publishing companies haven't done a great job is the publicity. They want an author who can get out there and sell it themselves.
Well, and there's a catch 22 there, right? So what the publishers want is an author that can bring an audience to sell the books through. And if you actually take that thinking one step further, if an author has a platform and a followership that they can sell books through, do you really need the publisher?
That's really the question. So it's really, I think the publishers have to be more innovative. We've done a number of things in the last few years with Barrett Kohler because
Yes.
Steve Perasante, I think, was creative.
Yep.
They only do 15 books a year and they really focus on them. And they have an author's day, which no company's ever. You go up there and you meet everybody from every department, and they talk about how they're going to help you with your book, and you really feel like you are part of an organization, and you can call anybody and talk to anybody. And so I think that's been a good one. And they're also getting good at finding online stuff. So I think the publishers have to be more innovative now too.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Well, and part of what Barrett Kohler does, to their credit, is create a community, because there's only so much I as a publisher can do to support you. But one of the things that I can do that's actually quite cost effective is to put together a community of publishers that can share best practices and help support one another and those things. And I think it's that level of evolved thinking
Yes,
that is changing in the publishers world.
yes, it really is.
My guest is Stephen M.R. Covey. So I'll give you the introduction, not that he necessarily needs one, but Stephen is the co-founder of CoveyLink and the Franklin Covey Global Speed of Trust practice. He's the former CEO of Covey Leadership. He's a Harvard MBA. He's the author of The Speed of Trust, and he is well-versed in the business, which is actually a family business for him, of content. So Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm so excited for all that we're going to talk about today. Well, welcome.
Hey, thanks so much, Peter. I'm delighted to be with you and excited about this conversation as well.
So today we have different formats digital, but the whole point was to take the essence and the gist and the message that's in the book and get it out into as many modalities as you can to to your point on your dad's beliefs around abundance, to get the message out. It's a good thing to do, right? But it's also a good thing to do for the business. And then you moved into sort of other ways that we can scale the content, right? So from speaking to workshops to train the trainers and clients doing it to the kit that you've developed, which is wonderful, The Speed of Trust in a Box, facilitator guide. Tell me, it's all the same, meaning it all comes from the same DNA of the same content, but there are different markets and different price points and different modalities for different types of customers. So tell me a little bit about how you and the organization decide what modality to put it in and what market that serves and how to not cannibalize and deal with all of those sort of struggles and issues.
Yeah. And those are real issues. I come back to the paradigm first. And truly, if the paradigm is one of abundance, you will see possibilities and opportunities you may not see otherwise. And so the paradigm does matter, and that you really believe that we want to impact people. Our primary motive is to help people, to bless lives, to get this out there, because it will help people, and I really believe that is important. And I think that
and I know you do. So let me just touch on that. So let's freeze the business side,
okay.
And just at a human level, the more people that get exposed to your work and your dad's work, the world's a better place, right? Because you're teaching them habits that are great. You're teaching people how to embrace a mindset of trust, and that's just good. Right. And then then it merges into the business, but it's just good to get good stuff out into the world, and gratifying on many levels.
It's good. It's gratifying. You feel like you're part of something that is meaningful, that makes a difference. You're making a contribution. And especially if you feel strong about your content, which I'm sure your listeners do, when you feel strong about something and you really feel like this works and it's effective and it can make a difference, you want to get it out to people. So that is the mindset and the paradigm. And the reason that's important is because that helps you kind of wrestle with some of the dilemmas of saying, what about the risk of this? And what about the risk of cannibalization of this? If your fundamental paradigm is, I want to impact people, I want to get this out, then suddenly you have more courage to take some risk. And you maybe say, that's okay. Maybe we do cannibalize a little bit here, but that's okay because we're getting this out there. And that was a dominant mindset. And we still had to figure out a number of other business decisions, but the belief was that it would come back around, and it has. And then we tried to find ways to target different audiences, and who's the audience, who could benefit from this. Always starting with mission first, always, and saying, okay, who is this audience that could benefit, and how might they, what modality might serve them best? And there might be multiple modalities that could serve them. But then we would ask the question, okay, and is there a sequence or a prioritization of those? And obviously, with some things we learned, it's important that we establish the business model first. And some modalities might have been more financially attractive than others, that we ultimately wanted to move to some of the others because it might reach more people, but as a financially attractive. And I'll give you a good example of that is, our initial work tended to be on the corporate side. And yet we had a lot of great stuff that we wanted to get to education and to not-for-profits. It's just that we wanted to price differently there and lower and have that be more of a mission type of approach. So it made more sense to start with the corporate side, because that could help fund the other pieces. and had we started with all the mission-centric type things where we're going to have lower pricing, it wouldn't have been as smart a business decision, because we wouldn't have had, the means to get our message out to everyone. So we adopted the mantra, no margin, no mission. And then the whole premise, we got to figure this out in a way that makes sense. But our goal was to try to reach as many people as we could.
Today, my guest is Brian Solis, who is a principal analyst at Altimeter, which is the digital analyst group at Profit. He is a world-renowned author, a prominent blogger and writer, a keynote speaker. His latest book, Lifescale, is a little bit different than his previous books. It's focused on how to live a more creative, productive, and happy life. Brian's been at this for quite some time and is a bit of a rock star in the thought leader world. So welcome aboard today, Brian. Thanks for coming.
Wow, what an intro. Thank you.
You've written a lot of books, done a lot of keynoting, and then came Lifescale, because this is a really fascinating story. So tell us how Lifescale came to be, and then I want to talk about how that has changed, or what has forced that to change the way you operate as an author and a thought leader in the business side of the house for you.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I should note is, in my work, a big part of it was the advisory. So I would consult big companies, and then also starting in the mid 90s, like say 96, 97, I was dramatically working with, and by dramatically I mean shifting all of my time and attention to startups. And the reason I share that is because the irony of the story I'm about to tell is we'll hear it. So in helping startups, I was learning quite a bit. The thing about startups is that, unlike enterprise organizations where they have a lot of resources to throw at market development and business development, startups had to go from 0 to 100 overnight. And to get them to become not just startups, but bona fide businesses and deliver ROI to their investors, you couldn't follow the traditional rule books. And so a lot of that work wasn't just understanding and humanizing technology. A lot of my work was also understanding how to make markets.
Right.
And where I think I built my name wasn't just on the research and the books and all of that stuff. The sort of before all of that was sharing, blogging, writing about all of the strategies to make markets for a lot of startups. And I think that's where I think my name really started to circulate in the industry, which is what ultimately led to books and speaking and what have you. And
I would say that was, if you think about blogging in the 90s, that was before we were using the term thought leadership and before, where blogging wasn't as rampant as it is today, right?
Yeah, well, in the 90s and the early 2000s, I remember using NetObjects Fusion as sort of building websites. It's sort of before weblogs and all of that stuff in the early 2000s. And it just sort of it just had a platform, to write and express your thoughts, because other places wouldn't necessarily, they don't know who you are. So why would they publish you? And that's where I built, I cut my teeth, but also built my brand on that stuff. And ultimately that led to me consulting with, in the early 2000s, a lot of the rising social media stars. So social media became attached to my brand for a really, really long time, because I was actively involved in not just advising startups, but also helping to cultivate the entire space. I was a big, big, big optimist for social media. I really felt it was going to democratize information, influence, connections. And here's where the irony comes in, is that after doing that for a good decade and having a lot of success in helping companies grow,
Right.
and helping a lot of people sort of adopt and change their lives and become empowered with social media, I found myself radically affected by technology's impact in my own life. And that's the path that wasn't necessarily as much a pivot as much as it was a fracture or fissure in my work and thinking, in that I had to get to the bottom of why.
So you can make an argument that because you were so good at the strategy and being able to see where it's going as an advisor and a consultant to these social media companies, you might not have been as poignant as seeing the potential downfall or negative side effect, because there's lots and lots of good things about social, but not everything is great.
It's really well said. And as an optimist, you tend to you maybe tend to look at things with blinders on. And so, for example, social media was, and Web 2.0 in general, there was some radical UX and UI innovations in the way that these apps and these networks were developing. You had the rise of mobile during this time.
Yep.
And so I would study UI and UX designs as a matter of learning how to communicate differently I knew brains were changing. I knew that we were becoming much more mobile. We were moving fast. And so I would take those design insights and so for example, apply it to some of my previous books so that the book would emulate a mobile app and be much more intuitive and fun to read. What I didn't know, and this is where the last couple of years of my work had focused, what I didn't know is that behind that design was what's called persuasive design, and a whole school of incredible psychological things that are employed to make those apps much more sticky, to make you want to share more, make you want to consume more. And so the difference was not the awakening, I should say, is that when I started to spend more time understanding what was going on with me, my inability to focus, my lack of creativity, my constant sense of busyness, my multitasking all over the place, just the lack or loss of depth and full-blown critical thinking, a lot of that design was at the source of it, and that's where I decided to change or take a break from my normal work to pursue LifeScale, because I had to fix my life.
Here you are, world renowned for whatever 20 years on one side of tech, and now all of a sudden, not that you're throwing any of those things out the window, but you're basically looking at the world through a different lens and a different perspective that may not be as whatever flattering to the technology community as some of your earlier work. So as an author, as a thought leader, as a speaker, tell us a little bit how that transition, that transformation has happened, and how you're taking that content into some of the same places and some different places, but it's a very different message. You talked about the book you were going to write. Well, that's the logical book to write. That's what your market wants. It would support your speaking. This was not that. And so talk about the business implications and this seems more mission driven than financial driven potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really interesting turn. When I started to do all of this research and kind of reveal how our brains and bodies were being rewired and what those impacts were, and I also had uncovered that those same types of design techniques were also behind things like fake news and bots, and really started to so for example, 2 years ago, I took all of that insight around what was happening to us as individuals, but also what was happening to us as a society with fake news and bots and why it was so believable. And I shared that as a keynote at South by Southwest. I think it was 2018. And so I still, as I was doing that research, I still wasn't on the path to LifeScale yet. I was just sharing all of this. I felt like somebody had to sound the alarm. Yep. And how the industry reacted to it was, wow. But still not the kind of wow that would say, hey, we need you to do more and more and more of this. In fact, I would say that there was a bit of resistance to it, in that no one wanted to poke the bear. No one wanted to say, oh, I have a problem. Everybody actually didn't want to accept that they had a problem with either their technology relationship or their relationship with information online.
Well, it's not as good for business.
It's exactly right. And it's also not good to, it's the same like with any addiction, right? Nobody wants to say that they have a problem. So at the end of that presentation, there were a few people that came up to kind of quietly talk about, hey, I've recognized that I do have this problem, and that I have been feeling anxious, and every time I go online, and what does your research show that we can do about it? And
right.
I thought, well, I hadn't done that yet.
Good question.
Great question. I was just so stoked about what was going on, and so impassioned to do something about it.
But you got confirmation that it's an issue, that it's a problem. So now the market could push back and say, yeah, maybe we don't want to talk about that. But then it seems like after a little bit of steeping, then they said, yeah, that kind of is a thing. Okay, big guy, what do we do about it? Right?
Yeah, exactly. So a couple things were happening at this time. One is a very well-known developer, Tristan Harris, who his work was dedicated to then exposing a lot of these techniques, and to also move the tech industry in a direction that was going to try to motivate next-gen companies to think ethically about the design.
Okay.
So I felt confident then that if Tristan and others like him are pushing in this direction, then I needed to just get back to my next book, but also think about dedicating time to understanding how we solve the problem at a mainstream level.
And this is early, right? So what's interesting about this, where it parallels your earlier work, is you're early to the game, right? Because my thinking would be, in 3 years from now, in 5 years from now, more people will be talking about this more often, with more solutions, probably some tech solutions, because that's the way life goes, right? And you're early to the game as you were with social.
Well, yeah, and it seemed to be, my track record has always been early to the game. So for better or for worse, right? I tend to develop markets and then move to the next thing just when the markets are becoming incredibly lucrative.
Well, maybe stay a little longer this time.
So true. But just to continue on the honesty front, as all of this is happening, I still have my problem.
Sure.
Right? I'm still distracted. I'm still multitasking. I'm still not able to get into the depths. And where I started to get from a philosophical point of view was I can't do anything. I can't answer these questions. I can't solve these problems. I can't make a bigger dent if I don't fix myself first. I started to do what anybody would do, which is Google solutions. And, and, of course, the normal stuff comes up like, mindfulness, yoga, meditation, digital detox.
Yep.
And so I tried all of those things, apps like Calm and Headspace.
Yep.
And look, they all work in their own way, but they were also treating the symptoms and not necessarily the problem. And I think philosophically, where I really started to think about things was, what does it mean to be alive today? What does it mean if we're not? I'm not realistically going to live a life without digital. I need it in my work, and so do a lot of people. So then what does it mean to be alive with these tools, not necessarily distractions? I think it was a choice. If I change how I look at them from distractions to tools, and then think about then how to rewire my brain and body in a way that was going to allow me to use these tools in ways that were not just positive, but also productive and healthy and creative.
So let me just pause there because, there's one school of thought that sort of, that just, well, go Amish, just turn it all off, which is just not realistic today. And to just not use these tools. If you're going to be on the cutting edge and a productive member of the universe, my opinion is I don't think that's wise advice.
Yeah, well, it's a movement.
Yep.
Cal Newport has a book called Digital Minimalism.
Yep.
And there's also a movement that's called Essentialism.
Yep.
Look, to each his own.
Sure.
I believe, though, that especially living in Silicon Valley and being a digital analyst and anthropologist, digital was going to be a part of my life, and I was okay with accepting that. But what I needed to do and what didn't exist or what I couldn't find was how to rewire your brain if it's been rewired in this direction, and if you're inducing all of these chemicals in your body that do these things that you crave in microdoses, then how do you do that in ways that push you, that do it where you're happy and productive and creative, right? And so that's the life scale journey. So still at this point, it wasn't a book. It was my way of fixing my life. And I went through these steps. I found what didn't work. I found what was working and what was pushing me little by little, and then bigger and bigger, and then deeper and deeper. And so I documented these steps, went through the whole process myself, and really started to feel good and great, and started to notice my work was getting better and more creative and coming alive again.
I'm excited to speak to our guest today, which is Jeff Hayzlett. I'll give you Jeff's quick bio so we can dive right in. So Jeff is a primetime television host of C-Suite with Jeffrey Hayzlett and Executive Perspectives on C-Suite TV. He also hosts a business podcast called All Business with Jeffrey Hayzlett on C-Suite Radio. He's the chairman of C-Suite Network. He's written multiple books, including The Mirror Test, The Hero Factor. He's a world-renowned speaker and a leading business expert in places like Forbes, Success, CEO Magazine, et cetera. So welcome aboard, Jeff. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Metrics are important, but they shouldn't be stupid ones. And oftentimes I see, and I'd love to get your take on this in social, I got, so many likes or retweets or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, what does that metric really mean? Is that an ego metric or a business metric? So can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's a real key thing. We measure, obviously I want to know how many followers I've gained this week, how many I've lost, what's my net, raise. But, I also want to know about the engagement. But more importantly, I want to know if I send this tweet, if I do this thing, what will be the result? Mm-hmm. And what is it I'm trying to drive? I mean, I recently posted an Instagram gal who has 2 million followers, maybe 20 million followers. I don't know. And she tried to get people to buy T-shirts, and no one bought them. Mm-hmm. So she was an influencer, an Instagram influencer. Really? Seriously? You can't get 2 people to buy a T-shirt, and you have millions of followers? I guess you're not much of an influencer. You're a de-influencer, quite frankly.
Right.
So so you have to really look at the metrics of what you were trying to buy. Give you a good example. On my own podcast, All Business with Jeffrey Hayzlett, on C-Suite Radio, I have the ability to see where the downloads are at, where people are downloading. I have it open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I started to watch the second largest country or area, region outside of North America, because I kind of include Canada and the US in the same bucket,
Sure.
it was India.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So what does that tell you about your business then? What do you do with that
Well,
information?
one, I need to start targeting more speeches there. Two, I need to target more potential board involvement. But more importantly, I need to change some of the things I say to be more reflective of the population, to be more, considerate. So I used to say things like, hey, I'm going to go after the show, going out for big steak. Well, probably not, probably not the coolest thing to do, with Hindus. So I calm that down a little bit. But at the same time, you can't lose your identity, right? Because I have a huge Jewish following, but I still make fun about how much bacon I eat,
Right.
and we play that up with the tribe, so to speak. And so
Yep.
there's ways that you can do it, but it shows you that the metrics can help you in terms of being, influential and then driving the things that you want to do.
Let's dive into sort of the nuts and bolts of speaking. I know you just came from NSA event. That business has changed a lot. So talk about the business side of the business, where the bookings are now moving. Majority of bookings are being done directly by the speakers versus the bureaus, and things that you're seeing that are working for folks. Because people struggle.
Yeah.
People that are great speakers struggle with the business side of it, obviously.
Yeah, well, it's not an easy business. I mean, the average speaker, makes about 150 grand, professional speaker, and I know that we're in the top 0.5% in the world in terms of the public speaking side of it. But, the business of the business is a tough one. It's changed. We still do about 35% through bureaus. All those, the other 65% is us direct. And we get that ability, primarily, one, just out of necessity. We can do a better job. Bureaus, I love bureaus, but they're working for the client, not necessarily me.
Well, but drill on that for a minute.
Yeah.
So go deeper on that, because I think a lot of speakers are delusional and think the bureau represents me. It's like, no, they have a fiduciary responsibility to their client, and you're just a commodity. So can you talk about that? Because I think just the basic understanding of the relationship.
Yeah, if the client says they want to go with someone else, they're going to go with someone else, regardless of whether they're with you. They're there to sell and facilitate and serve the client. So, there are some managed relationships with some bureaus or some agents,
Sure.
but that's a few and far between. And most speakers aren't even going to be qualified to speak for a bureau because they don't make enough. It's not worth enough for the bureau to do it, because the bureau is taking anywhere from 25 to 35% of the fee, and then sometimes are also getting paid by the actual entity itself on top of it. Sometimes, not always, but they're there representing the client. So typically, the client will say, let's say the organization or association or corporation. I mostly speak at mostly corporations, but they will say, hey, we're interested in this kind of speaker, and they'll go into their roster and they'll look up those, 25 to 50, and then they'll submit them. And they might say these three top ones are the ones I really look at. And then they look at your videos, they drill them down, and they'll look at a couple of your videos, and they might even call you. Sometimes I've had numerous calls with clients or the bureaus, So you want to help the bureau. I want to be as easy for the bureau to book and utilize me. I want them to allow them to put hold dates on my.
But let's talk about the easiness. So I want to talk about the easiness, because it seems, if we change the word speaker to any other business, that wouldn't even be in discussion, right? But for some reason, there's this prima donna factor on the speaking side that people don't talk about, where it's like, wait a minute, you're getting paid a boatload of money for an hour of your time, and how dare you have these ridiculous demands of, the size of your hotel room, and you only want a black car service, not an Uber, and all this sort of stuff, when you're actually an employee or of service to the client. It's just so anti-client behavior, but it's rampant.
Well, it's stupid, Peter. I mean, I always tell especially if I get on the phone with them ahead of time, because I do a lot of calls ahead of time, because in a big corporate setting, the last thing we want to do is the person picking the speaker make a mistake in the CEO's.
Yep, of course.
I mean, it's just not cool. So I always tell them, I'm going to be the least of your worries. You have enough problems going on with putting the event together. I will come in early. I will be there. I will do sound checks, if you want them. I hate sound checks. They're not for me. They're really for the people, not for me. because I don't care. I'm going to walk on the stage whether the lights are on or not, and I'll do what I have to do. But most of the time, I find that most speakers are a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
They rush in at the last minute, throwing their thumb drive down at this tech staff, and and I don't do that. I show up, the morning before at 6 a.m. or because I'm usually an opening or closing,
Sure.
or the break before, or the noon meeting before. Giving them plenty of time, making sure everything's cool, that they're happy, everything's good.
And thank you all for listening. For our next episode, which will be the part 2 of the best of our top guest of 2019, we're going to have Claude Silver. We're going to have Charlene Lee. We're going to have Kara Golden. We're going to have Dr. Ivan Meisner. And we're going to also have Dan Pink. So some really amazing authors and speakers and thought leaders that are pretty well known and pretty insightful. And I think you'll get a lot out of it. To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.